Welcome to a guest episode featuring TrainerRoad's very own coach, Jonathan Lee.
We chat through how AI is shaping training prescription and how TrainerRoad are integrating that in their training plans.
What are the most underrated and the most overrated training sessions amateur cyclists are doing?
And what is the role of wearable tech in shaping your training outcomes for the next 5 years? Jonathan, how big is TrainerRoad? Is it the biggest indoor, or the biggest, not even indoor, is it the biggest cycling training prescription platform in the world?
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of funny. Like, it's a thing that, Nate and I, the company's, I think we're in our 14th, 15th year, something like that now. And like in the beginning, I remember we even said, like, we made a decision very early on. We were like, we don't share our size, even with our wives. Like, we just don't talk about, like, the people closest to us, we don't even talk about it. So we've never externalized it. And I don't know how big, like, the competition is. If you go off of, like, ratings on the App Store and downloads on the App Store, we're the biggest. I'm absolutely, like, we're nowhere near as big as something like ZWIFT. We can go into that a little bit more. I don't think we're as direct competition with ZWIFT as we used to perhaps be viewed as.
In your world, Jesse, is it like, is it the biggest competition for a one-to-one coach?
No, I don't think it's in competition with a coach. It's kind of separate. To be honest, I think it's mutually beneficial, having both run together. I feel like if you're looking at, in terms of that funnel analogy, platforms like TrainerRoad get more people in the funnel, and eventually they filter down, maybe they get to me. But the more people that are coming in and know what is a structured session, what's a zone for, like, that's more people in the game. And then for a coach that's only got a limited, scalability to work with people, I really don't feel like I'm like, oh, I lost a rider to TrainerRoad. That's like, no, that's not really how it works. But there's some, in terms of, like, what do I think the biggest platform is that prescribes training to riders? I probably would say it is TrainerRoad. I can't think of anything else. There's some new up and comers that are entering the conversation. Like the Join Cycling seems to have popped up over the last year. Well, you mentioned there, Jonathan, that you don't really see yourself competing with ZWIFT too much. And we just saw literally overnight, TrainerRoad has a new collaboration with ZWIFT with the workout syncing. So that's kind of funny that we had that in there.
Yeah. I wanted to mention that earlier. When you guys sent me over the notes, I was like, I'll wait. I should wait. I'm not telling anybody yet. I'll wait.
So does this mean, are you seeing for the average TrainerRoad user, do you have an idea on the split between those that use it as a training platform versus those that are using it as a training prescription tool? Sorry, when I mean use it as a training platform, I mean like as an indoor training.
That was our roots. We were just an indoor app, I think, in the very beginning. And the whole concept kind of started because Nate, our CEO, he was a software engineer. He was at the same time trying to do triathlon, and he was getting up at like 5 a.m. or going up earlier than that to these 5 a.m. spin classes on CompuTrainers. And he was like, dude, I hate this. Like, I hate getting up this early and I hate having to go and put my bike on this thing. I wish it was just always there. And this is back when trainers, honestly, were really novel. Like, and a CompuTrainer was completely novel, that it could be hooked up to something. And he just thought, man, I think I could build this. And then he, as in the process of building that, he was like, actually, this could be a really good way to get a lot of really well-structured data, to have kind of like a source of like a measurable data set that then we could help us understand patterns and find patterns in a much larger data set. So if this whole thing ever grows really big, then maybe that's possible. And that was kind of like the pie in the sky, that just little by little, we started actually getting to the point where we were like, hey, we actually are getting that data. We are achieving size that's crucial to be able to do all that. And that's kind of where it all went. Now, at the same time, we were just this indoor training tool for a really long time, accumulating this data and like the real special thing is that we have all this data from athletes, and we know not only what they, quote, should have been doing in terms of what their target was, we also knew what they were doing actually, but then more importantly, in retrospect now with training models, with machine learning and artificial intelligence, we know what they should have been able to do. And those three combos makes it so that it's really, really helpful to be able to actually understand differences in that data. And it also makes it so that we aren't beholden to just like indoor data and just understanding that, but rather it gives us a ruler that measures 12 inches, so to speak. And then that helps us understand everything from there out. So that was kind of like the whole plan. But really, Jesse, directly, TrainerRoad's still is understood as like an indoor tool. Damned be our name. It's like still understood as like an indoor tool by a lot of people. But the majority of our athletes use it as a tool, not just to train inside. Now it's really nice. The majority of the athletes use it for getting the right workout at the right time, getting a plan built for them, and then being able to execute that plan inside on Zwift, in TrainerRoad, or outside wherever they want.
So is that the marketing kind of push then for now for TrainerRoad 2025 and beyond? Is like, are you advertising as we are a training prescription tool?
Mm-hmm.
Is that like number one? Not so much come and complete your workout on here?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's kind of funny with the Zwift launch that we just did today. We aren't asking for people to do this, but we'd be totally content if nobody ever used the TrainerRoad app again. If they just use it in Zwift or they just rode outside, wherever else, that's okay. Like it's kind of cool to have that sort of freedom, because like the real value isn't in the fact that like, man, back in 2012, it was valuable to have an app when you were at home that gave you that. And we never pretended to be the entertainment side. We knew that other people would solve that. We wanted to be on the data side. But now it's really cool to be able to have a robust enough engine that can then interface with things like Zwift. So then that way it just makes it so you can train wherever you want and then just get the right workout.
I actually think that's really cool, because if someone asked me like, personally, where do you think TrainerRoad should go? I would say that. I mean, good luck competing with Zwift. It's just probably not going to happen. They've just already got way too much market share.
Yep.
And we saw like Training Peaks, for example. They bought, what was the indoor training platform they bought? Can't even remember what it was called.
Indigo, not Indiegogo, IndieVelo.
Yes.
IndieVelo.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they recently
and
just
is
bought
now Training Peaks Virtual now.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's their big push. Is like it's at the top banner of the website, and
so
they're sending.
This is another virtual space you ride in.
Yeah,
okay,
it's another.
right.
It's basically Zwift, but it's a kind of a crappier version, Training Peaks branded version of Zwift, which is in its own thing. All right, okay, I get it, but I look at that and I just go, well, like, where's the value add there? Okay, I'm a coach. I pay for my athletes' accounts. They can ride on it if they train indoors. Okay, they probably would have paid for Zwift anyway. It's more fun. So that's an example. I just go, that just doesn't make sense. But this, from what you've just said there, like to me, it makes a lot of sense. And that's pretty cool. Can I ask a technical question about the data set you have? How do you go about cleaning that up? Just with, I could just imagine all the power spikes and dodgy power meters, and my mind boggles about how you actually filter that through to get some insights, because there's all kinds of junk in ride files.
I'm probably the wrong person to ask, because smarter people than me do that. That's for sure. All of that said, it is a constant thing that we have to work on. We just actually launched something today. I don't mean this to be like overtly promotional or anything like that. We just launched something today that's that gives you an idea of where you rank compared to the entire TrainerRoad athlete database. So like, it's a huge pool of athletes, and you get to see like in what percentile you are in your 5 seconds, your 10 second, and then it goes up, up to your 60-minute power. And when we were testing that and laying it out, there's so many people who are like, wow, I didn't know humans could hit 5,000 watts, and and also I didn't know humans weighed 1 watt per kilo, 1 watt or 1 kilogram, forgive me. So like you get a lot of noisy data. So it's all about like, the thing is, you can't just take a very basic algorithmic approach to be able to filter that stuff out. And that's where you get into the advantages of modeling, I think, because it can handle those complex edge cases and complex scenarios a bit better. So it's hard. And I think that's a constant battle. There's a saying that is like garbage in, garbage out with data and with any sort of algorithm or anything else that you put in. And I think that's probably largely misunderstood. All data is garbage if you look at it from a certain perspective, probably. And instead, it's just structuring the data in such a way that it allows you to work with it right. And to be frank, like that's a huge amount of the work. And it's not the sexy work. It's not the really exciting work. It's like, that's what our company is almost entirely software engineers, and that's the sort of in the trenches work that's done constantly, is the not very exciting, but restructuring, reorganizing, and changing how we actually store, use, move, and view all that data. So then that way we don't get thrown off by that sort of thing. But it's tough, like that's what we found with tests in particular. Like, I'm sure you guys have seen this too. Like, if you ask an athlete to go out and do a power test, your results may vary. Like,
Yes.
you don't know what you're going to get. And it's really hard to do it consistently for most athletes. And that's why, like, for us, one of the biggest obstacles that we had is, people would sign up for TrainerRoad. They'd be like, the workouts suck. And it's like, yeah, well, you're training with an FTP of 450, or you're training with an FTP of 80, and so like, but it wasn't any fault of their own. It wasn't anything they were doing wrong. So we had to find a way to do this that didn't require them to actually have that responsibility. That's why we developed like a model that uses AI FTP detection instead of just, basic algorithms that come from any sort of test or anything like that. It's kind of a hard problem to solve, and you can get some misratings. But one of the biggest things that we do is we have systems of checks and balances constantly. We're like, whenever we're building out models and we're testing this stuff out, we are testing accuracy, and we can compare it historically. We can basically like run simulations against what actually has happened to then see if it is accurate. And we do that constantly, and we second guess everything that we do, and we check it, and we're really thorough with that. But that's the hard thing about this whole, it's not as easy as, there's a whole lot more to AI, I think, than just plugging into Chat GPT and building your own GPT and having it talk to you or something.
I'm curious then, because it was kind of known for a good while, and we've probably laughed about this on the show before, about that the workouts TrainerRoad gave clearly looked like they were intended to be done indoors. And then now, as you've shifted more to a training prescription platform and more people are coming on that want to ride outdoors, and then, you are starting to look at doing a job that a coach would do, how have you started to deal with prescribing training that works outdoors and indoors, as opposed to just giving the indoor workout and then just syncing it to the Garmin and saying, off you go?
Yeah, it's like, that was one of our biggest concerns at first. We're like, nobody's going to be able to do these workouts outside. And it's not that our workouts are unique. It's just, it's hard to hold structure when you're outside. It's like, there's examples like Alex Wild, Keegan Swenson's another really good example. If you see his graphs, he's an artist, right? Like they're perfect and they look exactly right. I mean, you have to have the terrain for that. You have to have all the right conditions. You have to be really good. And that's the sort of thing that you guys can do, but most average people can't. So at first, we actually kind of developed a system where we were like, let's develop alternative workouts that with our data show that they would deliver a similar outcome, but with less complicated structure. And we'll send those out. And what's super interesting is I think that there's these situations in life where we think that we want a specific thing or outcome, but in reality, we don't want to do the work to get there. And a lot of us totally say, I want to do all my workouts outside. But in reality, when you look at the data, most people, when they have that workout and they send it to their head unit, they're like, bugger off. I'm just going to ride and I'm just going to do whatever I want. And that's like a thing that coaches are really familiar with, in the sense that like you prescribe the work, but the work doesn't get done. So what we heard from the athletes that do want to train and do it, they're like, no, give me the exact structure. Give me that. I want to hit that tight. But we don't push outside workouts a lot because it delivers a bad experience for a lot of people. Like more and more, what we're seeing is that it's becoming not as socially frowned upon to train indoors. And we think that does deliver for certain people, that delivers probably a better experience for their training. It comes with a lot of caveats, like training inside, you don't get any of the benefits that you get when you're outside. It's totally different psychology. There's a whole lot to it. But man, I'm sure you guys have seen this too, but athletes don't do a good job of nailing their workouts when they're outside. It's really hard to do. And if you have a workout that's going to be a bunch of 30-30s, that's going to be tough. If you have a workout that's got 20-minute intervals, that's also going to be tough. It's going to be hard for them to do it. But again, I think that if you're trying to analyze that from a coach to understand like what degree of adherence did they complete this interval, that's really tough to do, and to understand if they got the intended benefit sometimes when you're dealing with really noisy data. So we kind of cheat with that in the sense that we can use machine learning to analyze what it looks like and then pass it through everything else. But honestly, I mean, to your point, outside workouts are tough. And that's why we don't advertise them a whole lot, is because it's hard for a lot of athletes to do it and they get a worse experience. But training outside is crucial, though.
I actually haven't used TrainerRoad. I've just looked at people's training that have done it. If I'm on TrainerRoad and I want to do a session on Wednesday outdoors, is that a toggle thing?
That's right. Like if you train always Tuesdays, let's just say outside, and that's like your time, you can make that an outside day, or you can click on any workout on your calendar, just say, move it outside. It gets sent to your Garmin, Wahoo, Hammerhead, and then you can do it out there. But one of the funny things that we found when we first started doing it is so many people complained about, like, I wasn't ready for my interval to start. And one of the things that we looked in the documentation for Garmin's workouts, and we were like, hey, Garmin, we want to make it so that we can pass through this thing that's pause, or that hits like lap to start interval or start set. And we're like, can we send that through? And they're like, yeah, it's not really meant for what you're doing though. So I don't know if I do that. And we are very adamant, like before every set in every one of our workouts, to make it easier to actually complete outside, you have to hit lap before you start that set. That way it lets you get into the area where you want to be. It lets you get into the terrain that's safe or whatever else. And then that way you do that. And then if it's like a set of, 5 minutes of 30-30s or something, you aren't going to have to press lap every time you do a 30-second one. That would be tough when your eyeballs are crooked. So, but instead, it's just at the end of that set, then it just runs you into the the recovery interval. Once the next set starts or gets to that point, you have to hit lap in order to make it start.
So that's the customization. Because I think about it, a lot of I basically only ride outdoors, but the train outdoors. But all my efforts, all my intervals are very they're constrained, or they're almost designed by the terrain around me. And so I'm thinking to like a VO2 effort. So if I'm going to do a VO2 effort on a particular hill that I use, it's a 3.5 minute effort. And so my coach might give me 4-minute efforts, but I'll only do 3.5 minutes. And so would TrainerRoad's see me as failing that effort 30 seconds short by in the algorithm, or would that sort of be taken into account?
Yeah, it takes it into account. So it's not going to give you like an F. It's not a pass or fail. Instead, you're going to get partial credit.
Still get my green box?
Yeah, exactly. So it's still like, that's a key thing. It's kind of funny. I think a lot of people think I just train inside all the time too. And like, I looked at it last year and 93% of all of my rides were outside. So like, and I ride, when I say ride, I might do a ride once a month, but I train, 5 times a week typically.
I understand. Yeah.
Like I wish that I could just go out and ride, but I don't have the time luxury to do it. So all my stuff is structured. So I have like specific hills where I have one over, it's called Palladium Mine. And that road, I know that if I have 3-minute intervals, I can do that on the road bike, but then I bust out the mountain bike if it's going to be 4 minutes, because it's going to cause more drag and allow me to be able to do that. Yes. I have like all these routes, and I'm fortunate to have that, I guess, like, and you guys are too. And some people don't, that live maybe in an urban center or somewhere where they, the terrain doesn't allow that, but it's you do start to learn it, and it takes time. And I think that a lot of athletes probably just go outside. They see their power numbers bouncing all over because they're used to erg mode when they ride inside. And they're like, this is a terrible experience. What's going on? And even like situations like a lot of smart trainers actually smooth the power data that you see, like before it ever even gets to the app. So it's like the kicker was really famous for years, and I think they changed it and then they changed it back. It was famous for years for delivering this really smooth power, and everyone was like, the kicker's the best because it's the smoothest. But then if you actually looked at their power data, they were bouncing all over.
Should have been criminal. But I think they then made it a toggle to turn. You could turn it off. But I mean, so just a buddy and I had riders that did. I literally had a coaster rider that used just some TrainerRoad and a kicker, and honestly thought riding outside that the power meter was broken, and was like, oh, this is, I need to go indoor. I can't do this. This is impossible. And I was like, no, that's because what you were doing indoors was fake. That's just not what you were doing.
They actually changed it. And I think I remember they shipped out an update where they didn't smooth it, and people like rioted, like people hated it. And then like, and I think they went back. I don't know for sure, but it's, it is jarring, and it's hard to get used to when you train outside. And there's a safety component of it that's like super important that makes, like people need to be in the right spot and stuff. But man, I personally get a whole lot out of doing my workouts outside, because then I'm able to kind of do that. And inside, I love doing it with Zwift, and then outside, I love doing it like that, and I get all the engagement and stuff that I need. But
so for Chris then, who's cutting all his intervals short because he's only got a 3.5 minute hill on his 4-minute efforts from Trainer Road, is that will it do anything, or will it just give him kind of like an orange box? You got close, even if he can continually does the session wrong?
Yeah, I think it's the best way to look at it is that like our system doesn't look at you from a pass fail perspective in that regard. It's just always understanding what you can do. So then that means that if you're to do those 3.5s, and then afterward, there's like a key component with Trainer Road where we have the very objective way of measuring your performance, and then the subjective side where you answer afterward just one simple question: how did that effort feel? And the combination of that with the very in-depth data side of things really gives us like what we need. Like if Chris, for example, let's just say that our system knew that those 4-minute intervals were going to be like, Chris is going to be dying after those ones, it's going to be really tough. And if Chris ended up doing those 3.5 minutes instead, and then he answered at the end of it, he's like, yeah, it was hard, then like the system's like, cool. Yeah, he's doing good. He's like on track. It's not going to like punish you. It's nothing like that. So it's,
but it'll keep them at 4 minutes. Like there's no way to say, hey, Trainer Road, I actually can't do these 4-minute repeats because I don't have a hill long enough.
Oh yeah, no, you can. There's like an ability where you can hit something called alternates, and then you can pick from a workout. There's over like 5,000 workouts in our catalog to be able to have really high resolution to always kind of give you the workout that is the right workout at the right time.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear, because that was always kind of our like subjective criticism. Like we'd see, it was always really obvious to see someone riding a Trainer Road workout, especially you'd see them in Centennial Park, and there were just seemingly there were a lot of steps to the session or to the workout. So it might be 110% of threshold, and they're dropping to another percent of threshold, and they're constantly making these changes to the effort, which indoors makes perfect sense because it's you're changing, you're not always in the same kind of power zone. I totally understand it, but outdoors, that's a total disaster. But it's interesting that does.
So that would be toggling it to an outdoor workout. But if the outdoor workout didn't suit, because as a coach, I would just make them 3.5 minute efforts and maybe get you to do an extra one, right? But that would be using the alternate workouts.
Yeah,
thing. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's going to pick whatever is the right workout for you, which is pretty cool. I think one other thing that I didn't mention, I should have, is that when you are training outside, if you have an endurance ride, it just, sometimes when you train inside and you're doing endurance, it's engaging, like you were talking about, Chris. It's engaging to have interval changes every, whether it's 3 to 8 minutes or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of keeping you engaged. But outside, you just want to ride consistently. And the endurance workouts that you get prescribed for outside stuff are just very simple. It's just stay in that, it's effectively just stay in zone 2. It's going to give you a percentage of FTP, like a window. That's going to be probably somewhere between 5 to 10% of your FTP for a window that you're going to be holding in.
Okay, another example just to throw at you. So you're a club rider and you do Wednesday morning hills, Friday coffee ride, and then Saturday you always do the 4-hour club ride. And they're set in stone. And you only train outdoors. Can Trainer Road do something for me?
Yeah. So what it will do is, if you can substitute any workout for a group ride, or we call it a group ride or a solo ride, we call it. So like, and whatever it may be, if it was intended to be a hard day, it's going to give you like some basic prompts on how to approach that group ride that are going to hopefully make it harder for you. And if it's supposed to be an easier day, then it's probably going to give you some prompts to make it easier for you. And then it'll allow you to say, when you're building out the training plan, it analyzes your entire training history, and it looks at what you've done, what sort of training worked best to give you the sort of best performances. It then goes through the whole thing, and then it looks at what you've done recently, which is a really important part. And then it meets you where you're at, and then suggests an ideal training schedule for you. So that could be 2 days a week, all the way up to 6 days a week. That might have 2 days of intensity, or it might have 3 days of intensity, whatever it might be. And then it will suggest like a training schedule that is data backed. It doesn't mean that it's the only one for you. There might be other options too, but this is a data backed approach that you can use to get faster. And for each one of those days, you could make it a hard workout or a group workout or a group ride, forgive me, a solo ride, outside, inside. You can do whatever you want. You can even change the duration. And then it'll just tell you when you change it, it'll just be like, hey, this is different from what you were like, what is ideal. And then if you change it to the point where it would actually be too bad for you, then it'll tell you like, hey, warning, like this might lead to overtraining or something else, which is like a huge thing that we had to do because we started to get to the point where we're giving people a lot of tools to like train themselves, but not, they were just getting to the point where people were biting off more than they could chew.
It's interesting balance. Yeah. Of like, you want to make it, you need to factor these things in. Otherwise, if someone does 2 club rides a week and you don't factor that in, they can't use it. Because then they're having to make too many of their own training decisions. But then if you give too many toggles and options, someone's almost doing their own training anyway.
You have to have like guidance built in there. And that was like a big learning over the past few years for us is getting to the point where you're using models to almost like protect athletes from themselves and to give them the guidance that they need. We all have really big eyes and small stomachs a lot of the time with training, where we think that we can take on a bunch. Like, I don't know about you guys, but whenever I think of like, yeah, like what sort of like training works best for me, like consistent 800 TSS, I was doing that great. But I was also like, I didn't have kids, I didn't have like, my job wasn't as demanding. I was in my early 20s. It was great. Like I could do anything. I could just eat pizza all night and like stay up all night and I could still put out crazy power. And that's just not the case. Like, so, but we always think of our high watermark as like, that's what I do best with. And we oftentimes just keep trying to go back to that point. And like you said, like doing all the club rides and everything else. And it's really funny because you might have 1 or 2 structured workouts a week and that's it. And then you go and do those workouts and you can't do them. And the reason that you can't do them is because all the other stuff that you're doing that you think is benign, because you aren't thinking of it in terms of it's a structured workout. So we'd get a lot of people that were like, I'm doing low volume, like, but I can't do my workouts. And you look at it and you're like, dude, you're doing like 1200 TSS a week and you haven't taken a week off in about 42 weeks. Like, yeah, you're fried. That's why. It's not the workouts that are the problem. It's all the other stuff, So it's really, I think it's important to help athletes understand like, hey, like this is an approach that works for you and you can trust in it. It's data backed. And then they can go from there and add it on. And one of the big things that we added this year was fatigue detection. Initially, we kind of called it like red light, green light, which is it down in Australia or New Zealand that has the diet for that? I don't know if you guys have it for like the food in the grocery stores. Maybe it's New Zealand, I think.
Yeah, we've got stars that mean nothing, but yes.
Okay, got it. Yeah. And we basically like, for years, we've thought about bringing in HRV, of course, and like looking at that. But when you look at the data from scientific studies from an actual body of evidence view, when you look at it, not just a single study, but like from a meta-analysis or systematic review perspective, it doesn't correlate like to readiness to train like we all want, like we've all been sold for sure. There's been really good marketing on that. Like it doesn't tightly correlate. And so what we did instead is we basically tried to, I don't know if I should go into that. It's probably secret sauce. I can't go too deep into that, but we trained models to be able to recognize how much recovery you need and then how much fatigue and how much like stress you can carry. But it's not an algorithm, because an algorithm would just be like, all right, for Chris, these are the rules. Instead, it's constantly adapting. So it might know that like Jesse, like, I don't know, that you might have been able to just tolerate huge amounts of training way back in the day with not much recovery, but it knows that now today is different, and it's probably different than a month ago and probably different than a week before that. And it's constantly adjusting and figuring out when you need that rest. And that's been a huge help for a lot of athletes. They don't even have to do trainer road workouts, structured workouts. They can just ride how they want. There's a lot of people that sign up for Trainer Road just to have that, because it's like, it highlights that day as yellow. And it's like, hey, easy endurance day, or it highlights it as red, like do a rest day. And that's been huge for athletes. And it's also helped a lot of them when they're like, I can't do any of my workouts. And then when they look at it, they're like, oh, I'm red every time because I do, 8 hours on the weekends. And then I can actually not tolerate that. So it's been kind of an interesting journey. Like you said, you give them the tools, but then you realize that you need to guide them a bit more with it.
So in that club ride example, you talked about, so it monitors with the secret sauce way how recovered you are and your fatigue and things like that. Is it also analyzing what the ride is achieving or doing? Like a totally unstructured ride?
Yeah, it is. And that's like a key component of it, right? Or else we wouldn't be able to differentiate how hard that effort actually was and how much fatigue you have and how much recovery you need as a result. So it is going through and it's looking at what you're doing in terms of power, in terms of heart rate, all that stuff. And it's trying to figure out the sort of toll it took on your body.
And it categorizes it as junk immediately, as it should.
I hope it's not just looking at TSS or something. I'm assuming there is more stuff going on than just looking at the load, right?
Because not all TSS is created equal. Like, like Chris, I've seen you recently standing like on crit podiums and stuff. And then, you look at those sort of efforts compared to when you go out and do your 5-hour weekend rides. If you're going to be going out and hitting 94 TSS, 96 TSS in that crit that was an hour long, but then you go out and you do 3 hours and you hit 96 TSS, it's obviously a totally different training stimulus and also different level of like fatigue on the body. So that's like and a basic algorithm example of this is like the performance chart that we are all very familiar with, where we have the freshness and we have fatigue and we have everything else that goes with that. And that's a very basic algorithm. And that's why all of us know that there isn't like a magic number that we have. It's like, I perform best at this number. That's the promise of it. But in reality, we don't have a specific number that we.
But yours, so your ride analysis from a how does this fit into a training plan perspective is, to use the words, is magic. It's not just, it spent, there was 20% in zone 4 and it was 100 TSS and like a bunch of inputs. It's actually artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it is. It is. And that's like the big thing. It was kind of, did you guys keep track of the Strava thing recently when Strava like released their terms of service? So they basically said, if you use our data for any sort of AI or ML, like you can't use it.
Can't use it. Yeah.
Oh.
Yep. And it was a big deal. And they updated the terms of service across the board. And we were like, well, that affects us. So like, and we had a decision where we were like, okay, so like, what do we do here? We have backups with other platforms that we bring in data from, like Garmin Connect and others and stuff. But we made the choice. We were like, hey, Strava, can we schedule a meeting with you? We use AI and we use ML in very specific ways. And we want to show that to you exactly how we use it. So you guys can decide. And it was really great though, because I guess this kind of probably talks a lot about the competition. There are a lot of other apps that kind of pretend to do what TrainerRoad does in a lot of ways and pretend to use AI. And it was great because that actually got a lot of them to kind of put their cards down on the table and be like, actually, we don't use it. It's like, we don't use AI and ML, so please don't cut us off, which is great.
I was always, but oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's hard to, the fact is it's really, really hard to do AI right. And we're still learning how to do it. Like, it's not like we're some, perfect sterling example that knows exactly how to do it. I think it's pretty evident even by the largest companies in the world, like OpenAI and what they're doing with the whole thing. Like they're learning constantly and they're at a crazy level. And we're in this really niche space of cycling data and using modeling like this in this area. But it is hard, man. It takes a lot of work.
So is AI going to kill Jesse Coyle? Is that the question? I want to ask you guys. Can I ask you?
Yeah.
Like both of you guys. Like, is AI coaching going to replace the human coach?
I think it would be silly to think that over time, with enough training, that AI couldn't prescribe a technically more effective training program than a coach could. I think that's almost inevitable because it's pulling on all the knowledge I have and all the experience I have times a million. Like it's me and all the other coaches. So I think it'd be silly to think that it isn't eventually going to always make, but it's more about a system of choices. Like coaching isn't just like laying out a training plan. It's just constantly making a choice of like, do I need to change this day? what should I put for this day? And then what should I put for the next day? So I think on on like a case by case basis of all those decisions, I think it will beat a coach's, prescription. What do you think, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think, I agree, but I also think that there's certain personalities and certain people that will have a need for having an accountability partner. Not only an accountability partner, but also like a confidant and a person to be able to, like, they need that person in their corner, sort of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
That may not be the case for everybody, but that will absolutely be the case for some people. You mentioned something at the beginning of this, Jesse, about it being complementary. And I do think that's the case. Like, our customers aren't coaches at this point in terms of us building directly for them. There are a lot of coaches that use TrainerRoad for their athletes. And I think that's the future for a lot of coaches, is that they use TrainerRoad and it kind of gets rid of a lot of the busy work for coaches. And it maybe you'll let the coach manage more of that personal relationship with those athletes. We don't have a training platform built out for coaches. We don't have we don't replace Training Peaks in that role as like a coach's tool to manage a bunch of athletes and manage billing and do all that stuff. We don't want to build that out. Maybe someday, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. But for us right now, we've got a lot of big problems to solve with finding the best ways to make people faster. And that's kind of where we're focused.
So can I just dig into that? So, I mean, I'd be a stretch to call that a coach. I'd say maybe if you're I guess that's what they call them, like a life coach or whatever. You're just kind of like a almost like a trainer,
a therapist,
or yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then so you don't actually prescribe the training. You just get TrainerRoad to do it, and you're kind of just there looking over it. I guess. I think the people that would use this first, weirdly enough, I think are professionals.
Mm-hmm.
I could see Jumbo Visma using it first and foremost, because they have more data, because they could feed it a lot more data, because they've got the riders on hand at training camps. They've just got a lot more stuff that they can collect. And I could see that being so overwhelming for an actual coach on a World Tour team to go, how am I'm just sitting down with tabs of stuff open with all this stuff I've collected. I can't even really use it because I can't physically sift through it. Not that that person couldn't train a pro rider well, but to train a pro rider better, like, it's almost inevitable that you end up having to do that.
It's kind of interesting along those lines. Like, pro athletes tend to have the cleanest data, like good pro athletes, I should say. That there's a wide spectrum. But like, the best pro athletes have really clean data. And what I mean by that is, like, their adherence to their targets is really good. Their ability to be consistent with their training is also very good. That makes everything very predictable. It makes everything pretty straightforward. And whenever we look at pro athletes, or they want us to look at their data and see, because there's, whether it's top level triathletes or cyclists that use TrainerRoad, they almost use it as like a consultant. A lot of them do, to kind of see, like, what would TrainerRoad have said I should have done today or should do today, and they kind of check it out. And with the best athletes, it hardly ever differs from the best ones that really know how they should be trained. They're very in tune with their body. And there's some of the best athletes in the world that would probably suck at this, by the way. It's kind of like a unique skill set, I think, that some athletes have, where they like really know exactly what they need. And some of the best coaches in the world are like that too, where they're able to understand that specific person, that athlete, in a very unique way. But it's cool to see that it doesn't actually differ a whole lot in a lot of ways, in terms of, like, yeah, today I was going to do 2x15 with 5 minutes rest in between. And sure enough, that's exactly what I was supposed to do, and it kind of lines up. So it is really interesting. I think that there's probably a whole lot of efficiency to be gained, like you said, Jesse, on the World Tour front with teams, they have so much data, and it's probably really complicated if they're trying to take like a weird third-party approach to like apply some sort of language learning model to try to understand all their data. ChatGPT can like do a really good job of certain things, and other things there's specific limitations, and in 2 days it'll probably be totally different, because it's crazy how fast they adapt and how fast they improve. But the one thing for sure that we've learned is that, like, you can see it with ChatGPT, there's so many different models that they have now that you can use. and each model has unique strengths and weaknesses. And I think that cycling should be looking at AI from the same perspective of like, we don't need to use third-party models that already exist and kind of bring them over to try to understand our data. We need to actually approach this from a data science perspective and build it ourselves. Because if you don't, then you're just not going to be getting the right decisions made, you know?
Can I ask on that too? You mentioned they're using like a language model versus whatever AI system you have. Potentially just a dumb question, but what does that actually look like? Like you've got your training plan is asking, what should I do tomorrow? Right? Like that's what it's essentially doing. But obviously it's not asking a language model. Technically, what's it doing? What's it actually doing?
Yeah.
Or is it
it's
asking
looking
it?
at
I don't know. It's just that the AI is in the data that it's processing through.
Again, I'm probably out of my depth for telling you exactly what it looks like. Looks like a lot of math. That much I do know for sure. And I'm bad at math. But so basically what it's doing is, and I think I can probably be transparent about this to a certain, I think it's okay to say this. Like, so we started off using machine learning first. And like machine learning is an example of, if you've ever used those plant apps that you can see that you've used, or like you can take a picture of a plant and it's like, oh, and it tells you exactly what it is. Machine learning is really good at recognizing patterns, like visual patterns, or patterns that maybe in other ways aren't visual. But largely and very commonly it's used that way. And it will look at something, and provided enough data to be able to analyze, it can start to recognize patterns at a speed and at a rate, and also at an ability that like humans just can't. And it's because we're informed by our own biases and our own experiences, whereas these models are trained to not have those. They're much larger. So that's like something where machine learning is used, and we use that. And that's where we started to use things by actually like looking at your power profile. It's like visually looking at it and what it looks like. Now, when you're getting into AI, and it's really common where people might use something like machine learning and then have an algorithm. And an algorithm is it's probably going to, this is oversimplifying, and a software engineer is probably going to jump in the comments at me, and you're totally welcome to, because I'm probably screwing up. But, it's effectively, you could say that an algorithm is going to be a lot of statements, like if this, then that statements, where it's going to be filtering certain things out and keeping certain things in, and making kind of like a logic tree that you could see. And it's going to guide you through the logic tree to achieve some sort of an outcome, whatever it might be. And AI is not following such a strict, rigid framework. And instead, it's like a principle-based approach that allows it to be able to make decisions on its own. So I think that that's probably like the best way that I could describe it, is that it's closer to human thinking than it is spreadsheet thinking, where we define rules for every single step. And then that's how we can get to the point where you can give it a huge amount of data. And unlike a human brain, it's not going to forget that data. It can reference all that data instantly. And then that's how it can make those decisions quickly, because it's this kind of like principle-based approach.
That's a fantastic answer.
I think it's interesting that it's like, is that a problem that you're asking, like if you ask a coach, what session how should my week look? A good coach is prescribing that based on essentially best principles from based on physiology and science, and then individualizing that for the rider. But it seems like an AI that's been trained on other riders' training is kind of pulling the best trend from what a million other people did. Does that have potential to have quite a big bias, because you're relying on the best trend of still what other people did, not what's objectively the best?
That's a really good point and a good question to ask. And we've asked ourselves like the whole time all along, like, are we developing a biased data set? It's really important for us to understand that. And I think that what we see many times is that if sample size gets too low, like for example, when you're trying to analyze whether something is working effectively and you start to actually get into vetting it, right? You might find yourselves looking at a cohort or like a group of people that's really small, because you're just trying to narrow things down and look at a specific use case, and does it work here? And if it gets too small, then you instantly see data that doesn't align with the rest of the data that we typically see. So it's pretty easy to find bias. Tesla has a really good example of this. I asked one of their engineers with their full self-driving system, which I don't know if you guys have ever, I don't know if in Australia it's legal
It's here,
to do.
but we
to use it.
haven't. Yeah, I haven't been in it.
Like a year ago, if you had asked me, like I hated it. It was terrible. Didn't work well. It was annoying. Now it's insane and it drives better than me.
Mm.
Like it is absolutely wild, the rate of improvement. But the thing that I thought was really cool, I asked one of the engineers, I said, how do you respond to the question of like garbage in, garbage out? Because when I drive around on the road, there's a lot of terrible drivers.
That's a good point.
So like
Yeah.
putting that into cycling, like you could say like there's so many people are training the wrong way.
Mm.
Or if we're just looking at the best cyclists in the world, are we going to train everybody like Tade? Like, and is that actually the best thing to do? And if we just target, like I talked about, that really clean data that you get from the best of the best pros, if we do that, that's probably not going to be the best approach for everybody. And he had a great answer for that. He said, well, if we didn't have garbage coming in, then how would we know what garbage looks like? And I was like, that's a really good point. And he was like, if your engineers are doing a good job on what they're doing, then they're going to be able to train models that can recognize the bad, recognize the good. And when you have such a huge data set, because again, like we kind of lose our ability to comprehend how big these things are. But when we're talking like over 250 million rides, it's gargantuan. And when you have that big of a data set, scientific principles are proven through data when you see it at scale. That's like why systematic reviews and meta-analyses are so helpful. You see a single study and it tells us that we should never ever eat a carbohydrate. And if we never eat a carbohydrate, we can be fat adapted and be the fastest cyclist in the world. Then you look at another study and it's like 180 grams an hour. And if you look at either one of those, it's really tricky. And then you question the fact, like, is all science terrible? Right? Because it's so extreme. When in reality, if you step back and if there's enough research going on a specific topic, then you can see that it's actually sound and you can see the scientific principles rise through. So that's kind of how we are able to see it. And it's cool because, you can look back at like Joe Friel, right? And and Andy Coggan, like honestly, the pioneers of really structured training in cycling. I know that they did heart rate training before, but really they're the pioneers. And if you look at what they did and they're looking at these principles, it's not like they made something up and then we all followed it. It was based off of data. And those same principles are still true today. And it's cool because we get to see it like in the data set across the board. So that's why it's pretty fun to be able to say that, like, yeah, it's like science-based because it proves the very things that we have read in research and even training and racing with the power meter volume 1 way back when. Now it's on like volume 13 or whatever. So it's, I think that's the best way to answer that one, Jesse, is like bias is there. The risk for bias is always there. And you have to be heads up enough about it and be engineering around it in order to avoid it. When you have a huge amount of data, it makes it easier for you to avoid that.
It's almost a frustrating answer. It comes back to when you asked, do you think like AI could be a better coach than you? You almost have to say yes, because if it does what it's promised to do or what you read it should do, like it should be able to wipe the floor with me because it's got like 1 billion more inputs than I have. And that, I guess that essentially answers that of like, it should be able to detect its own bias, or if it's built well, as Jonathan said, it should be able to, to kind of do that on its own. It's kind of just any question you kind of ask about AI, it's like, no, it's just smarter than that. Like, it's better.
All right, we're going to pause really quick for a word from today's show partner, Silka. Now, there's a bucket of products on their website that are interesting you and I. What do you want to highlight today?
Well, have a look at this. Now, we use their secret chain wax blend for the immersive waxing with the pot that you've got behind you, but I want to point out 2 products that you can add to that to tweak the blend to get more for your riding. So they've got the speed chip that reduces the friction of the wax. So if you're doing if it's a race day coming up or a time trial, you just drop the chip in with the wax when you do the immersive blending, and then there you go, improves the efficiency of the chain. Or if you want the wax to last longer and you're not as worried about the pure speed, you can use the endurance chip. Put 1 or 2 of those into the wax pot, and that'll just help the chain last up to 2.5 times longer between waxes. So customize your wax.
Waxing has become the new gluing a tubular for me. It's like that process that I really quite enjoy. But I want to highlight something a little bit different, and it's becoming a little bit more important as we sort of move into the tubeless world, and that is pumps, inflation, but specifically accurate inflation. So they've got the Super Pista digital floor pump, which is their digital floor pump that has an accuracy of 1%. Now, this is getting more and more important as we sort of get into wider tires, and the difference between 35 psi and 40 psi on the road is actually really significant. So having a very, very reliable pump is very, very important.
So if you do shop at silca.cc, use code NEROSHOW, all in capitals, and that'll get you 15% off. And thanks to Silca for supporting today's episode of The Nero Show. I heard this training-related question come up on another podcast, so I wanted to ask you, Jonathan. It was on the Matchbox podcast, which is Dylan Johnson and some of the other guys that he coaches with. And they had a person ask, what's the minimum number of hours that you need to be riding per week for structure to make sense?
Probably going to give you a frustrating answer again. The data shows that it's relative to what the individual has done recently and historically. Like, it's kind of, I'm thinking of athletes like I've seen athletes that have come back from not training for years, and they can get faster on 1 to 2 hours a week. And then there are athletes that have been training for a long time. Like a person like me, it's so frustrating to try to get like 3% improvement. And to get 3% improvement, I have to go from like 10 hours to like 15 or 20 hours of training, right? To get like that extra 3%. So I don't think that there's a simple answer to that one. But in terms of for structure, like the minimum for structure, the less time you have, I think the more important structure becomes in terms of how you're making use of that time. Really, if you can't train a lot, then you have a lot of time to recover. And that's probably an important thing that other people aren't thinking about. Or at least you have a lot of time that you aren't training. Your life might be super stressful, but it may not require such physical effort that training requires all the time. So if you have that extra space to recover, but you don't have the time to train, you can probably make those training sessions more intense and to be able to get more out of what you have. But what we see most athletes, honestly, when you look at the average athlete, it's really hard for us because in cycling, unlike any other sport, we actually understand what Tade is doing. Like, and I'm not saying us at Trainer Road, all of us, like, we know that Tade is out there doing X amount of hours. Like, I have no clue how many hours LeBron James trains. I have no clue, right? But in cycling, I know not only how many hours, but I know probably about the training intensity distribution that he's doing. I know all these weird details, and it's kind of odd that we know all that. And it probably hurts a lot of us because what we do is we
100%.
think that we should go out and do exactly what they're doing.
Oh, sorry.
In
I thought you were
reality-
going to say it hurts because it's frustratingly not that much that like a good semi-retired Masters rider is probably doing. Anyway.
Yeah. And I think that most of us should be probably doing less. And the data shows that a lot of athletes lump themselves up with a bunch of training stress. And then when they get to a point where they get fatigued, they take 3 weeks, 2 weeks off, and then they pick up more. And then when you look at that from a mesocycle perspective and you're stepping back and looking at it, if you were to kind of do like an annual average TSS that they're carrying, they never get to achieve a high amount of training stress for a long time because of the fact that they dose themselves with too much and drop off. So it's really like, we really want to know what's the minimum I can do to get faster. And I would say that Trainer Road is probably a pretty good representation of that. Like when you sign up, it will analyze your training history, meet you where you're at, and then like kind of bring you up from there. So it's probably like the most practical answer, but it is all entirely relative. But I think that the common mistake is people take on too much.
Well, I'll ask you, Chris. How many hours would you have to be doing before you just go, I'm not even going to do a session. I'm just going to go out and ride?
Like in terms of a small number?
Yeah, minimum. Or never.
Yeah.
If you were still running 2 days a week, would you do a session?
Probably, I'm weird. I would probably even lean further into structure the less I got. I'd become so antisocial, completely not want to go out with anybody, yeah, I'm probably not a good person to ask. I reckon I could still do it on 4 or 5 hours.
Okay.
Maybe.
It's interesting. I from
You
memory,
turn into me.
Dylan's
Mm.
from memory, Dylan's answer I think was about 5 hours a week. Yeah, I think he initially said 6, and then the other co-host talked him down to 5. His kind of point was under that. By the time you're doing 2, maybe 3 rest days a week, that means each ride's an hour, hour and a half. That you may as well just kind of go out and ride fairly hard, and you'll get fitter from that. And it's only when you're going above that that you need to start to have periodization of individual days and individual weeks within that. So that was his answer.
Interesting take. I think that if you look at that from the perspective of, yes, if you train more, you do need to rest more. But if you're training less, you need to make sure you're getting more out of your time.
Mm.
And that's something that a lot of athletes don't think about. There is a temptation to think that I don't have too much time to train, so I'm just going to go out and ride. But really what you're doing when you say that is, I don't have a whole lot of time to train, so I'm going to make less out of the time that I have to train. Yep. Like, instead, you should shift your perspective. And if you don't have a lot of time to train, you should lean even further into structure, in my opinion. Mm. And I think that that's something that you see with like the best pro athletes. When they have a huge amount of time to train, they are very intentional about the structured portion of what they have. And then outside of that, yeah, they're going to have less structure to what they're doing. But I think that for us average athletes, if you have less time to train, you should be focusing more on what you're actually doing with those rare minutes that you have.
It's one of my absolute gripes, Jonathan, is the classic, and I don't stop at many cafes, but on the odd chance I do, because just it's normally a time thing for me, is I'll be sitting down and a person will say to me, "Oh, I just don't have that much time to train," and yet they're sitting at a cafe on the sort of Friday morning slop ride, and I'm like, "Well,
this is so cathartic for me right now.
Like,
this is so cathartic."
I don't do these rides for that exact reason. That this is and my priorities are different, obviously, but yes, if you're doing those sort of cruisy, this is how I'm going to just flap around rides, don't complain to me that you don't have time to train, because they're the moments. Anyway.
I got another one, training related. Kind of the training sports science trend is quantifying and learning how to train to improve fatigue resistance or durability, whatever you want to call it. Does TrainerRoad have a metric to assess a rider's fatigue resistance and measure if it's improved?
This is hard to measure. I think that there's a lot of it filled the void of like polarized training, I feel like, because that was the topic du jour, right? Mm-hmm. And then durability, I feel like over the last years kind of filled that void. Mm-hmm. And I think that there was a lot of hype around it that was driven, perhaps like got a bit of a life of its own, the hype in and of itself. Coaches didn't just now focus on durability. like they have been focused on this forever now. And I think that any coach listening to this, that I like, again, ask Joe Friel and then ask Andy Coggan what they thought about durability. And they're like, yeah, of course. Now, did they term it durability? Probably not. They might have been referring to it as like fractional utilization. And then they probably would have been talking about it in a combination with muscular endurance or something else. Like the terms might have changed. But what we would love to be able to like kind of show this to athletes that like your durability is improving. But the interesting thing is like, if your FTP is higher, your durability is higher. Mm. And if you think about this in terms of like a boxer that has an extremely strong trunk to like, and they can take a huge amount of punches to that trunk. I could punch as hard as I possibly want, and I could punch them as many times as I want. But since their threshold to absorb my punches is so high, it's just not going to make that much of a hit on them. And then when they do choose to unleash power on me, it's going to just be lights out for me. And I think that there's with these pro athletes, when you hear a coach talking about durability, when you hear Tade's team performance director talking about it, when you hear somebody else at that level, they're dealing with athletes that are improving 1% year over year. And they're trying to focus on like, okay, so we can't really move FTP up. because this person is redefining what the limits are for a human to be able to do
He's
that.
already doing 7 watts per kilo.
Yeah, exactly. So instead, they're not cutting a blade. They are honing a blade to a degree that most of us average athletes probably don't need to concern ourselves with. That doesn't mean we don't need to concern ourselves with durability, though. But it does perhaps put it in context when we hear a coach say, like, I don't focus on FTP, I focus on durability when they're coaching Tade or somebody else. It's because the FTP doesn't really matter. They know Tade is going to be at the same amount and it's going to be like a 1% change. Instead, their job is to focus on something else. Whereas for me, even though I would fight for 3% a year, that 3% in FTP is going to be meaningful. So I think that's important to keep that in context for people. But durability also has very close proxies, and probably one of the closest proxies is muscular endurance, that a lot of, like, your ability to be able to carry out force and hold force for a significant portion of time, because that also ends up going into those long rides and you're riding perhaps easy and then able to do those hard efforts in the end. We're constantly looking at different ways to measure this, and we want to be able to display it for athletes. In terms of how we can and where we're getting there, we haven't found a good way to do it yet, but we still want to keep going down that road, because I think it is an important thing for athletes to keep in mind in specific scenarios. But in the end, my hunch is that we'll find that if an athlete improves their FTP, that's going to be the main driver of improving their durability. That's just a hunch, and I could totally be proven wrong. So,
is this where, when we were talking about my climbing efforts, and you were talking about, oh, you're bigger now, like, but with more muscle mass, your muscles therefore have, like, there's the potential for, I don't know if you used the word durability, but it was like that they were using.
I think in that conversation I mentioned your glycogen storage capacity would be higher.
Right, okay.
And in research, when they test strength training, one of the improvements they do see is in durability. So, yeah, potentially that. But I kind of find it interesting that you mentioned, like, oh, just increase your FTP. Because I also don't really have an answer for this one, like, as a coach, of a test you could do for it. Obviously, you could make up a test, go and do set number of efforts over the first 2 hours of a ride, and then in the 4th hour, do a 10-minute effort. Like, it's not hard to come up with a test that stresses durability. But it brings up quite other few questions, like, do you test at the same absolute power if you repeat the protocol, or do you test at a relative intensity? Like, if I say, Chris, I want to measure your durability change. So I want you to go out and do 4 10-minute efforts at FTP over the first 2 hours. Then just ride endurance, and then in the 4th hour, do a 10-minute effort. Then you train for 6 months and you come back. If you just did the efforts at the same exact power output, you could improve your durability just by increasing your FTP, because the relative intensity of those would have been lower, and your durability could have gone backwards in a relative term. And so I actually haven't really, I don't prescribe durability tests with riders I coach. It's absolutely a training factor and something that needs to be worked on, but I don't benchmark it. And that's why I was curious if TrainerRoad has figured out some kind of metric to put a number on it. And for example, there's other factors, like maybe you just got better at fueling. You were having 70 grams of carbs an hour 6 months ago, now you do 120. Or maybe you just got better in the heat. It's so hard to figure out a test that removes the other factors that could influence the result that aren't actually true peripheral muscular durability.
I completely agree. And this is an interesting point, because I think that if you are going to look at any well-structured training plan, it should be building up the endurance of an athlete. And if their goal is something that, like a road race or like anything else, is going to be harder efforts toward the end where selections happen, it should be targeting that sort of outcome with the training. Like you said, Jesse, I guarantee you that if you looked at somebody, I don't know, I'm trying to think back to the tour of guys that were getting dropped when Tade and Jonas were hitting it. I bet if you looked at it, they had a higher IF at the end of that race, before the attack started flying, they had a higher IF than Tade and Jonas. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it probably came down to the fact that they were riding closer to their threshold all the way up to that race than Tade and Jonas. Whether that was because of group riding ahead of them, riding more efficiently due to that luxury of having that, or whether it's just because they are truly like the best athletes out in the field. And I think that, we really see durability matter with those longer races. And like I mentioned, like with Dylan and the gravel races and that sort of thing. And it's really important for them that are racing at the pointy end to focus on honing that blade. But for the rest of us, man, the best way to better your finish position in a race is to make sure that instead of doing a 2-hour race and being at 0.9 IF at the end of 2 hours and just completely blown up,
Mm-hmm.
you're at 0.85. If you're at 0.85, man, you've got some gas to use. It's a pretty big difference.
I still think there's still a physiological thing happening there though. But I remember, I'm potentially going to butcher this because I can't really remember the study, but I think they tested, there were things that you might think correlate with durability, like increased fat oxidation at lower intensities. You'd think, oh, well, that spares glycogen and that will make you more durable. And I'm pretty sure like 6 months ago, I read a study, a recent one, and fat oxidation at sub-maximal outputs wasn't correlated with durability. And that threw me because you'd initially think that would be correlated. Now, I do think pure durability is a thing that if you did probably a muscle biopsy, you should be there would be some changes that are specifically just durability. But maybe that's something in a few years' time with enough data that there's some way that TrainerRoad can actually give me a number on how durable am I that isn't taking into account all these messy things that a coach has to do.
I don't know. As my take as a rider is, you almost said it in the sense that because of all those variables you talked about, like the temperature, your nutrition, your equipment, were you wearing black helmets? Why all this sort of stuff? I just find there's so much other elements to that kind of a test that it's almost going to be impossible and almost irrelevant because these other factors are going to play such an important role anyway.
Yeah, sorry, there's an interesting question, right? Let's say TrainerRoad does come up with a durability metric. Like, to what degree does that actually have span to change? And what in other riders that thought they improved their durability, how much of it was actually these 10 other things that they improved, and how much of it was this actual durability thing, which I don't feel like has actually been quantified yet.
You mentioned the glycogen sparing thing, and that merits a lot more research. That was super fascinating. I can't remember which paper that was. I have a handful that I'm trying to look through right now, and there's no way I'll be able to find it because I'm just looking at a bunch of titles on my computer. There was a study that came out that showed exactly what you said there, is that like the surprising thing is that they were looking at a relatively small cohort of athletes. This isn't looking at 20 athletes and above or something, but they found that logic has told us, and a lot of coaching narratives have told us that to be the best, you need to spare all your glycogen as much as you can and instead what it showed is that these top athletes absolutely dump glycogen. They have sewer pipes instead of straws, and they're really good at doing that. And it's probably, we had Matteo Jorgensen on our podcast 2 years ago talking about how he was taking in 160 grams an hour in the tour, right? And that was 2 years ago. And they're taking more than that now. Like top end triathletes are even taking 200 and above, right, on the bike. And we don't know what's actually going on there. They're actually getting ahead of research because research it doesn't back that up. But the crazy thing is these athletes can absolutely drain a huge amount of it. So we don't really, to your point, durability is complicated, and maybe we misunderstand what allows an athlete to be able to put out those efforts. But for me and the average listener, because I'm an average person here, I should probably focus on not getting to the end of the race at 0.9 IF. I should instead focus on getting to the end of the race at 0.85 IF. And that's going to make me, quote, more durable.
So underrated workouts or underrated types of training. Are there any specific types of workouts that amateur cyclists are ignoring but perhaps should be doing, or training principles in general?
training principles in general, doing more than they should on rest weeks and on rest days. Um, like there's this weird thing in our minds that if we think that we don't look at our power meter, that it's always zone 2, and that like, or if I'm not doing a group ride, or if I'm having fun on my bike, then it's still zone 2. But if I'm not having fun, then it's not. And that's one of the main things, is not respecting recovery weeks. If you look at the best athletes training, you'll see a very consistent ability to respect recovery weeks very well. Keegan's like a very close friend of mine, and I'm privy to all the training that he does, and we're always talking about this. Keegan is a bottom of the range athlete. And what I mean by that is, on easy days, he shoots for the absolute bottom of his power range that he gets from gym. The absolute bottom, and he does not go above it.
So
he
who's
sets
Jim?
a hard ceiling.
Jim is...
Sorry. Oh, his coach, Miller. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, Jim Miller. So he is a bottom of the range athlete on recovery days. And on hard days, he starts out at the bottom of the range and then explores going upward as time goes on in those intervals. So I think that approach of respecting your limits, and specifically in those recovery weeks, is something that not enough athletes do. I think the other thing, though, in terms of like underrated workouts, people right now, zone 2 has had its time in the sun for a long time now, for the last couple of years. And I think a lot of people probably didn't fully appreciate like what zone 2 is actually accomplishing and how to do it. And I think that zone 2 work, if you're riding at the top of your zone and you're doing that, like is commonly referenced as a suggestion to people, you don't realize how hard that is.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you don't take a rest from that. And that's my most favorite type of work. Like if you're to ask me, what would I like to do on the bike? It's go out and ride at 75% of my FTP and hold that without coasting a single second. And to do that for like 4 or 5 hours. Like that is satisfying work. It boils a frog. By the end of it, I'm cracked, right?
Good
But
average
it feels
speed, though.
easy.
Good quick
Oh,
ride.
it's so good,
average
man.
speed,
Past a lot
So
of people.
good.
Mm.
Yeah. It's so good. But the thing about that, like, that's really hard work that is going to make it so that I can't just jump into a hard workout the next day. It was still zone 2. That doesn't mean I can jump into a hard one. And then on the other side of it too, a lot of people ride in zone 1 when they think it's zone 2. So I think that zone 2 is just highly misunderstood. It's also complicated because it was tied into so many longevity discussions, right? And its overall influence on health. And cyclists in general, like all of you listen to this, if you are listening to this podcast, you're an athlete. Like, I don't think that we have any average people that just like jumped on a Peloton today and then they're like, I'm going to listen to the NERO podcast.
Yeah.
Like, you're an athlete.
Sorry if you are.
So-
Yeah.
But you're an athlete. Like the discussions around health advice for sedentary individuals and the mass population do not apply to you in the same way. Like generally speaking, perhaps, but not in the same way. So when you hear somebody talk about doing zone 2 and it's the key to living longer and everything else, like exercise is the key to living longer. And for people that are sedentary, it's going to help them. Like you're already exercising and you're doing way more probably than what is like suggested for the bare minimum. So for us, when we hear that stuff, we should always pass it through a filter. And you have to think about the fact that like, I can't just call something zone 2 and then think I'm ready to do my hard workouts tomorrow. It's pretty tough. And if you are doing productive zone 2 work, what it looks like isn't harder. What it looks like is just disciplined. It's like just riding there, whether you're structuring it by heart rate, whether you're structuring it by power, it's disciplined. And that's pretty tough.
What do you think?
I've got a few. I'll answer the thing that question, but I've found as a coach, I actually think a lot of riders, not a lot of riders. It's obviously individual. I've had people that I've looked at their training from TrainerRoad, and I think they can handle more with appropriate supervision, with the right guidance on how to more of an eye on recovery and fueling, and then being ready to pull back if I detect it's getting too much. But in like a 3-week overload cycle or build cycle, yeah, I mean, I feel like there's riders can do more. The problem, if you're a training platform, you don't have the luxury of like individually being able to see it and kind of guide it. So I guess you're kind of doing that with the updated suggestions, which is kind of based on how the rider feels when they're doing the workout, or maybe there's other data that's getting pulled in. But
yeah, it takes care of it in that regard, in terms of the progressive overload portion of it, making sure that it's doing the right amount of stretching to their abilities. That part's pretty easy to take care of, because when they get to a point when they say that, whatever the workout they did with it is easier than it should have been, and then if their performance was what it should have been as well, then it ramps you up, right? And ramp rates aren't static. Ramp rates are entirely individual, which is cool too. So that's like, so it takes care of that approach.
That's the problem with a generic ramp rate. Oh, I went up more than 5 CTL or whatever number this week. I'm like, that's just absolutely made up. That's like based on what, for who? Sleeping 3 hours a night? Sleeping 12 hours a night? I mean, it's just so arbitrary. It just, but obviously you've got more data than like sticking to some random number ramp rate.
Yeah, but progressive overload, that kind of point you're bringing up, it's super important. I don't think enough athletes achieve progressive overload. And it kind of goes back to what I talked about before. It's, it's probably just life getting in the way, but it's training interruptions and and they miss workouts. And then before you know it, like, let's just say the athlete was doing 500 TSS and they were carrying that week. The next week is 440. And then the week after that is 460. And then the week after that is 490. And the week after that, they're taking a recovery week. And then they go into the next one and they still haven't gotten to the point where they're, ready to surpass 500 for some reason. You know what I mean? And so then it's really tough for some athletes because they'll be like, I've been training consistently for 3 months, but like my FTP hasn't gone up. Why? And I actually just like looked at an athlete on this because they reached out about it. And I actually recorded a podcast about it. And I'm like, well, when you actually look at it, like, you have been either skipping workouts or missing workouts for any number of different reasons. But then you've been doing like your 2 workouts a week. Sometimes you just drop that to 1 workout a week. And then you kind of fill it in sometimes with something else. So when you look back at it, like you feel like you're on the bike all the time. But in reality, you aren't achieving progressive overload. Like you said, so what our system will do in those situations is it understands that it can't just like make it all up in one session. Like it's not going to just give you a monster threshold session or something that's going to try to make it all up. Consistency, man. It's like, it's really hard to do. And it's probably the biggest enemy to improvements and achieving progressive overload.
Yeah. So I'm going to also contradict myself because there are some cases I've seen, I'm like, I'm almost certain you can handle more load. We just need to get a head around what you're actually doing day in, day out. And I think you can get more and still recover at an appropriate rate. But at the same time, to answer that question, what are some things that cyclists missing? Not having progressive overload still somehow gets confused. Cyclists get confused. Like, oh, I can do 15 hours a week. I've got the time. And then they just want to like week 1. Oh, but why don't I just do 15? I've got 15. Why don't I just do 15? Like no one would go into the gym and do 20 sets of squats and 15 sets of bench press. It's like, oh, because then I'll get stronger. It's like in the gym, anyone that's done strength training just knows that. It's just you get the appropriate stimulus and then you come back next week and you lift a bit more. Like it's dead simple. For some reason, there's something about cycling or endurance sport where that just doesn't naturally click. And it's like, but why would I just do 10 if I have time for 15? There's just I have never figured out why that is. I just have to, that question I have to answer a lot more than you would have thought. And then you give the gym analogy and people are like, oh yeah, that's obvious. So that's probably the most common of, yeah. And like you've talked about some of the local guys around Sydney that do kind of like, they're doing the bunch rides or, the Saturday rides and things or the racing. And they're like, I don't know, I ride a lot, but like, why aren't I getting fitter? And like, it's probably because there's no progressive overload and every week is 750 TSS and it's just the same week. And they're kind of going, why is my body not adapting? It's like, because you haven't stressed it more and given it time to rest as probably the number one overarching thing.
It's so true. That to achieve progressive overload, you need to have intentional rest within there, right? And that's like a key thing to recognize.
How aggressive are you with your rest weeks? Because this is one thing I'll answer preemptively before I leave you. Like, I've seen some crazy, aggressively easy rest weeks where I go, I know you gotta have your progressive overload and your deload, but like you weren't on a training camp. You can do more than 3 hours this week. Like, how do you have any info on that? Like a percent of the build or things like that?
The amount of athletes that substitute their 1 hour endurance ride that they were supposed to do during their recovery week with a walk, like a dog walk, or like substitute it with, I don't know, insert any other activity. It's way too common. Like, and what we prescribe typically, like, again, we don't have a specific, because there's very common where people are like, it should achieve somewhere around 50% of the highest loading TSS of what you had the week before. And in our case, it's going to fluctuate depending on the individual. Like what I've seen our system do is that when you haven't achieved that much loading and progressive overload throughout that 3-week loading block or 2-week loading block, whatever it is, then it's probably not going to drop you down as much. It's going to recognize the fact that, like, hey, like, we still need to achieve progressive overload here. We're not going to overwork you. You're not going to be like doing tempo the whole time or doing anything harder than that. Instead, still endurance, but what it prescribes and what athletes do is very often not the same thing. Recovery weeks have the worst adherence across the board. And I think that, it's probably behoove all of us in the cycling and coaching industry to like change up the terminology a bit. And if we called it a deload week, I do think that maybe it doesn't make as much intuitive sense, but it would probably be more effective. I think that people hear rest and recovery and they think vacation. And if you do that, like, 1 out of every 4 weeks or 1 out of every 3 weeks of your training is a 0 effectively. Like, it's going to be really hard to achieve the sort of load that you need to get changes. Like, you're stacking bricks, and that should happen over the course of the year. So
what do you do, Chris? What's if you're having a deload week, like full week or 2 days?
No, I'll still ride. I'll definitely still ride 5 days, but I'll probably substitute. I know what I'll do. I'll substitute out. So basically, I drop down to 8 to 9 hours that particular week, and
what do you usually do
in terms of the day by day?
No, sorry. You drop to 8 or 9 hours from what?
12, 15.
Okay.
Somewhere around there.
Like a third.
Yeah, something like that. The week before last was a good example of that. Drop down to that. I will still do some intensity, so I will still do a crit race on a Tuesday night that goes for 45 minutes. But then during periods around that, I'm probably just running an hour or two quality zone 2, like proper quality stuff.
Not running. You meant like, you're doing an hour, an hour and a half. Not,
Sorry, yes, doing.
You're not put the joggers on.
No, the joggers are well and truly parked at this point. Good quality zone 2 stuff. And then, so by the beginning of the next week, I'm kind of pumped and ready to go. But then because I don't have an off season as well, that's why I also play I do certainly take that week kind of seriously, because as you know, I don't tend to have any sort of off season, just with the nature of the kind of weather here, really.
You guys have races like year round in Australia, effectively. Like, it just doesn't turn off.
Our actual domestic road racing is actually in winter. They used to do it to line up with the European season, and it kind of just stayed that way. Oh,
so this is a follow-up. I think I know how you're going to answer this, but off the back of that, are most riders, based on TrainerRoad's data, well, you'll probably say they're all doing perfect training. Are most of them, if they're doing something wrong, are they doing too little or too much? Actually, now I don't know what. I thought you were going to say most are overtraining, but now I think if across the whole spectrum, probably most are not quite sticking to it.
Yeah, I think I probably would have answered that differently 6 months ago, and I might answer it differently in 6 months from now, like as I learn more and more. I used to think that too many athletes were overdoing it. And then I feel like what we've seen from our models over the last 6 months is that actually a lot of athletes are probably undershooting what they can do, but not undershooting it from like an intensity perspective and not undershooting it from like a hard riding perspective. They're undershooting because they're just not doing like they're not filling in the rest at the right levels. Like it's, but I'm thinking of one athlete in particular on the Trainer Road forum who had gone 4 years and they had not taken a single week off in 4 years. And
I know one of those people. I do know one of those people.
And
you're like not far off.
I'm not far off. Yeah, I'm not far off.
But the crazy thing is when you looked at the quote deload weeks, like we're talking about here, they were, Chris, like if you're talking about, let's just say that you were doing 15 hours a week, their deload week would be 14 and a half. It was like, it might have been even like something to the point of like some sort of obsessive compulsion that was in place. I don't know, but this athlete had no clue that like they were doing something wrong. And they were just like, no, I think I'm like, I don't know why I've just been plateaued for the last 4 years. Yeah. Like, and so I think that it certainly varies, but I don't want to be the person that just waffles on every question. I think that in general, athletes probably can do more and they aren't. And I think that structure is their friend because it's going to give them more. Mm-hmm. But boy, they sure have to make sure that they don't just think of structure as the hard days. They should also make sure that they're still doing the easy stuff. Quote, easy,
That's what I found with maybe just because if you get a rider that comes for coaching, that's probably a period in their life where I want to ride more anyway. So my experience is obviously biased for that reason. But generally, yeah, most riders I'm giving a lot more in overload periods than they probably were doing. And generally, they handle that well.
I think that cyclists aren't doing enough structure. And I think that in general, that's probably a safe generalization. And I think that that's the big thing that should change. It's like, in terms of whether they're doing not enough or too much, I think that they're not doing enough structure if they want to get faster. If you don't want to get faster, who cares? But like, if you want to get faster, you should be more deliberate about your time and you should be more structured with it.
I don't know if this is an anecdote even worth throwing in here, but I'll potentially throw it in. So before I came in here, I went I saw Edwin and I said, I'm talking to Jonathan today, and he's like, structured training just breeds soft people. It's like, okay. Please elaborate. Interesting. He's like, well, it's a problem with intervals, and the problem with any sort of structured training is you don't really learn how to hurt yourself. The only way to learn how to hurt yourself, Jesse, is in like basically a crit race or some sort of race, or the chop or some hard, fast-paced group ride. Right? That's the only way you really, really hurt yourself, because it's just soft. Because otherwise, it's just numbers. It's just numbers. Doesn't really matter. So I just kind of, and I actually do think that would be the impression of structured training from a large cohort of the male, predominantly cycling world.
Jonathan Lee, comments?
Yeah, I think there's some people that use structure to drive themselves into the absolute ground. Mm-hmm. And they like I'm sure we're all familiar with the concept of like a coach prescribing an impossible workout, and then they like prescribe it again after a few weeks, and then again after a few weeks, and then eventually you nail it and you probably feel like $1 million, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you've probably dosed yourself maybe a little too much fatigue along the way. But there are other athletes too that totally dwell in a safe space. There are a lot of athletes that train with an FTP that is too low. Like they set it low because they're like, otherwise it's like every workout hurts. And it's like, well, bikes,
that's kind of the game.
Bikes hurt. Like that's the whole point. I mean, if you don't want to be fast, that's cool. But if you want to get faster, yes, it should stress your abilities, which will feel like pain and discomfort. So I feel like if structured training is well calibrated, it should push your limits when it needs to, and then it shouldn't push your limits when it doesn't need to. But there is absolutely, I think if you're a racer, there's a absolutely critical component to racing and to group rides, or things that if you're a mountain biker, it's to like getting out and riding that sort of terrain and doing that sort of thing. Like it's irreplaceable in my opinion, if you're a racer. And it's really odd because, triathlon is a world where a lot of those people, you'll talk to pro triathletes, they ride the trainer and they race and they go on a race course and that's it.
They piss all over themselves and
there's nothing in between, right?
Good.
And like that is, now there's some athletes like Lionel Sanders, and I don't think that anybody doubts that Lionel Sanders probably goes deeper than the average person. That guy is an animal. And there's a lot of athletes like that can probably get that out of themselves. But I do think that the nature of triathlon and the culture that kind of just is like, just train on your own and do your own thing until you race. It's probably better because they should pace themselves because they have to run afterward. But are they actually pushing themselves on the bike to find their limits? In a lot of cases, they might not be. So I think that there's probably good reason to what Edwin said there. Like, there are a lot of cyclists that probably underachieve their abilities because of a safe net that they've built up with nerfed structure.
Or numbers that are you can blame sometimes a structured workout for that. Like TrainerRoad could be to blame. Does TrainerRoad ever have sessions that just goes, here's the range, but I want you to absolutely bury it and give every single thing you've got in this session? Is there any workouts like that?
It's all target based, except for like our harder stuff. We're going to get into like high VO2, high anaerobic, that sort of stuff. It's kind of like sky's the limit in a lot of cases there, and it allows athletes you'll see the power range like on your Garmin when you do it. And that's another thing too. Like, if you're doing
does it do that
stuff,
by does it just make the range go to a power output that you theoretically never do, and then it just in the description says just send it?
Yeah, so like it's tricky because when you're talking about erg mode, and this is gospel by John here. This is not like some sort of scientific principle.
No, that's how we operate here. Completely our own.
I'm not an erg mode fan.
Yep.
I don't like it. And I don't like it for the reason that I think that it's made a lot of athletes lack confidence in their ability to actually know what power feels like and be able to hold that power and also be aware of their limits. It just it's like you're on the leash all the time in a sense, or you have a crutch, and then suddenly when it's gone and you're outside, it's kind of like, what do I do? And I also like the ability to be able to push harder or push less. Now in TrainerRoad, like you can increase or decrease the intensity and you can do things that way. But I really like just I typically ride these rollers that are super problematic and finicky, but I really like them. The Elite NERO rollers, and they allow me to like ride inside and they have erg mode if I need, but I can just set the resistance and get a lot. And I like training like that because then I can do exactly what you're talking about, Jesse, is erg mode because with erg mode, I can't give you a window. With erg mode, it just gives you a specific power target and you have to stick to it. But then if I'm turn erg mode off, I just toggle it, I can ride to whatever target I want. And with those sort of intervals, if you're riding outside, it's going to give you a much wider window.
But it'll tell you, there are some sessions that will tell you to do that. Because otherwise, if someone doesn't have the instruction to do that, they'll always just go, I'll just hit the range and I'm good. And then they could go, it's been 3 months and they actually haven't done anything that is above a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, absolutely. It says that in like the workout description, the workout goals, and sometimes on-screen workout text too. It'll tell you like, turn off erg mode and push it hard. But all that said too, there's something like talking about crits and stuff like Chris and this, in my opinion, you should not be out like trying to like sprint and increase your sprint power on a trainer. Like don't be doing that. Like you should be doing it. And that's like a very contextually dependent situation. Like you need to learn to put that power out while you're riding on the bike, doing that outside. So, but yeah, that's I kind of agree with Edwin to a certain extent. I think there are athletes that do hold themselves back.
I'll be deleting that comment just quietly. This is not going to make the final cut by any stretch of the imagination. Anyone agreeing with him?
Oh, the boys at the shop are going to love that.
God, quick question off the top. We've got underrated workouts. What are the most overrated workouts?
Ooh,
I think that can I call Zone 2 overrated? That'll make a YouTube clip.
You stole my answer. Go.
Yeah, I think it's overrated, but not. I think it's probably just maybe a better term is misunderstood, but in the end, it does end up delivering a higher rating than it should get. And I also, man, this is going to be an overrated and underrated. I think that 30-30s are overrated. And I think that like longer VO2 efforts are underrated.
Yeah.
But they're also like longer VO2 efforts are highly feared, and 30-30s are a lot more friendly. There's a time and space for 30-30s. And I know there's scientific research that has shown that like similar outcomes in VO2 max adaptation specifically happen with 30-30s and longer intervals. But I'm sure if you're listening to this right now, you probably agree with me. When you have to hold high VO2 into anaerobic power and you have to do it for 4 minutes, like, and just absolutely you're cracked at 2 minutes and you somehow have to do that again. Like, that is a unique skill.
Yep.
And if you don't train that, it's really tough.
Yeah. And I mean, I know I had a lot of trouble increasing doing any VO2 training. And I know for a fact, Dan, my coach, hid my VO2 training in 30-30s for almost a year because he just knew, because I just kept bailing on the session. Like, I just kept bailing on the session because I couldn't, they just hurt. They hurt too much. And he hid them for a year. And then I went back and started doing them. I was like, hang on, where did this happen? So yeah, I mean, I do agree the VO2 is completely underrated. Anyway.
Okay, overrated. I got a laundry list. Over-unders or anything with spikes and surges, I prescribe them. I hate when the explanation gives, oh, this is the best workout because it simulates a race. And you don't just sit at threshold. You got to do surges. And so surges are the best session. I just think that's just a terrible explanation for why a session is good. It should be hitting a physiological target, not mimicking some abstract race scenario. So over-unders or anything like that, overrated. Zone 2, overrated. Everyone needs to do zone 2 rides, but sometimes you got to do a tempo ride, and that's not bad if it fits in properly. So zone 2 doesn't automatically beat it. So I got to say zone 2, overrated. Full-on big race simulation rides.
The preparation ride.
Overrated. Again, I prescribe them. Elliot Schultz, who we had on, he said one of the best things he did for his training was doing race simulation rides. But I'm still going to say overrated because it's an extra like 3-5% on the top of all the other training you did. And then it gets all the credit on race day. That's because you did the simulation rides. I'm going to say overrated. That's my main ones. I could probably come up with more. With the devices like the Super Sapiens blood glucose monitors I think we've probably already mentioned the heart rate variability and things like that. Does TrainerRoad use data from any of that in the AI? And then secondly, does TrainerRoad have an opinion on where that's going over the next 5 years? Is there some of the metrics you think have legs?
Yeah, we have that data. And I probably, just like the size of our company, I don't think I should ever say what exactly we use, but we have that data. We have that there. Like I said before, I think that it's still hard for us to understand the utility of a lot of this new data, and even like HRV. And the research isn't conclusive when you look at the body of the research. Individual studies, yes. In terms of like training readiness, deciding that. So I think that's one spot where I think there is potential with HRV. It's like, while it may not correlate neatly, it does correlate. And I feel like in enough circumstances that we need to do more digging and we need to figure out what we need in order to get like better data out of this.
Because you would probably be ahead of the research because you already have the data that you could learn from, right?
That's right. And I think that like, you should, if you had a data set like ours that is like expected and prescribed versus outcome, and then you're really able to look at that in retrospect and kind of see and draw those correlations. So that's like really helpful to be able to understand all that. And I think that's kind of like ties into the rest of the stuff. Like there's some really cool stuff between whether it's like bib shorts that are measuring things like, like your blood lactate levels, blood oxygen saturation. Then there's things like the glucose sensors. And one of the things that we found out about glucose sensors is just the fact that like, most of them are measuring like interstitial fluid. And then as a result, that's not actually getting to the point where it's measuring your actual blood glucose. It's a proxy. As a result, it ends up being delayed So it's kind of like bad data. Like the theory and the dream is like, I should measure my blood glucose. So then when it gets low, like I can fill it back up. But in reality, like what we're actually learning is just like more is more and more is great. And like, just give yourself more when you're on the bike, which honestly makes a whole lot of sense when you realize that, you know, when you're riding at 156 watts for an hour, you're burning 80 grams of or 90 grams of carbs right there.
Yep.
Well, I should say you're burning that many calories. Who knows how many carbs you're burning versus fat? But the point is, we've got big pipes and we probably just need to make sure we dump a lot of sugar down them. So I think that we're figuring out that with that, and then with everything from lactate sensors, everything else, we'll have to see where lactate goes. That's a really interesting concept, but I think that it should always be tied into power. Whatever metrics, whatever novel stuff that we get, I think that it should be tied in with power, because power is really unique in cycling, where we get an actual output of your energy that represents the majority of the energy output of your body. So that's rare, and we should never throw that away. Like a sport like running wishes they had like a metric so neat, or a sport like, I don't know, motocross or something. Like they can't actually quantify the effort like we can. So we have a really good tool to action, like a ruler that actually measures 12 inches. That's power. And then that way we can understand if any of those metrics matter. The sky's the limit though. The big thing that we'll have to do is what we do with the data. And that's probably why AI is so important. And that's an AI problem we won't solve. That's an AI problem that other software will solve, and other people in other industries that are going to be focused on wearables or something.
So that's interesting. Yeah. So that it doesn't sound like that integration between health and wellness data and then the impact that has on training doesn't sound like you feel like that's a big mover in the next few years. It's more the training feeding back its own training. But sorry, not for you guys to do internally.
Yeah, I don't think that we're going to be the ones to solve it. We'd probably be able to validate it. Like if I was building a device like that, I would be talking to us to see if we could do that. And I don't think that we could, because we're a bootstrapped company. Like we don't have investors. Like we're not like, you know, Zwift has raised like $750 million. It's like, that is not us. So like, we don't have the bandwidth probably to just help out researchers on that front. But boy, our data set would be really useful for that. So, but we've got enough problems to solve in terms of figuring out how to like help people get fast. And I think that really smart people are going to figure out what to do with HRV data, how to organize it, store it, handle it, filter it, we'll do whatever else with it so that it can actually be more signal than noise. And when that happens, we'll probably benefit from that as well, while we're solving like the training prescription side of things.
Oh, that's sad. That's always in the past few years. That's been sold as the golden goose. Is just like you're plugging in this training platform with all your sleep data and everything, and that somehow magically spits out the perfect training or a better adapted training thing. But it sounds like, at least as from TrainerRoad, that's further down the track, or maybe not down the track.
Maybe not. It's all accelerating so fast. Somebody could solve it like really well and figure out like, oh, hey, here's HRV data that actually like decides what training readiness is. And I wouldn't be surprised if we were involved with that process, like helping them figure that out. In terms of it being actually used by us, oh, absolutely. Like we want any and every bit of reliable data that can help a cyclist get faster, like any method to make that happen, we're there for it, you know?
If that data is valuable to you, would you ever have like a discount if someone's plugging in an Aura ring? Because like if that's feeding you data that you can use, would you be like, okay, you get $5 a month off your subscription because we're getting all your Aura ring and we can correlate that with your training, and that's useful to us to encourage more riders to plug more stuff in?
Well, I feel like that's not, if that was a bottleneck, that like we didn't have enough data like that, then maybe that would be something that companies would have to think of. But I don't think that's the bottleneck. A lot of people are recording and the data's there, but there's a difference between just having raw data and then being able to interpret and use that data correctly. And that's the problem that needs to be solved. It's not a problem of not having enough raw data. I mean, look at companies like Oura Ring and Whoop and Garmin and Apple that are recording all of this data en masse. And all those things feed into TrainerRoad in one way or another. It usually ends up getting back to us, whether it's through Strava or Garmin Connect or, anything.
You've got the better end of it because you've got the ride files. Like Apple just has kind of slightly dodgy heart rate data and sleep, and then they don't have the power.
They're wondering how long an inch is, and we have the ruler.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
But at the same time, solving these problems, like I said in the beginning, is so hard. Like we have our plates full with what we're trying to solve. So we can't pretend to go out there and be like, I can solve the HRV problem. I can solve the blood lactate measurement or blood oxygen saturation problem.
I ask because there are other platforms that are saying they use that, and I've always been like, that's a big, that's a obviously okay. Maybe they don't say they're using AI to do it. Maybe I think they just say like we take it into account, and it's probably just a basic algorithm. But I have seen that from some other training platforms.
Yeah, there's a difference between having the data and actually using the data. And it's probably not explicitly clear with a lot of companies because marketing.
Yes.
So
I just a couple of quick questions about your own riding, if you've got time.
Yeah,
super quick. So I don't know. I was going to throw you a couple of either ors. So are you running tubeless or tubes?
I haven't ran a tube in any of my tires and my children's tires even in probably
inspiring the new generation. This is great.
Yeah, probably 8 years.
Fantastic.
I don't know. I was running like tubeless probably really in a sketchy way on clinchers before then. Like I just I can't even comprehend running clinchers, and it drives me nuts to see these like clickbait headlines where you see old dogmatic world tour thought processes blaming every problem on whether it's disc brakes or tubeless tires. And it's really frustrating to me. Like they're holding the industry back by trying to get regulation imposed on wheel and tire manufacturers now because of that. And instead we should be moving it forward.
Do you use hookless wheels or hooked?
Dude, that's a good question. I run Envy wheels right now.
Hookless.
So hookless. And so I have the 4.5s on my road bike. Love that wheel set. So good. And then I'm looking at my TT bike right now, and it's hookless as well because I'm running a 7.8 up front and then a disc wheel in the back.
Nice.
And then on the mountain bike side, definitely hookless too. No issues. I've never had a tire blow off ever.
But you come from a off-road background or just an everything background?
Yeah. So I raced motocross as a kid my whole life growing up, but then just wanted to get back on two wheels, and I was poor in college. So I got into bikes because gas was free for a bike. So and mountain bikes is where I started to get into cycling. But I've raced road, crits, everything else the whole time all along. But if you ask me what I'd rather do, mountain biking, cross-country mountain biking all day, like that or a crit. Those are my two favorite things.
Interesting. Okay. So in terms of road bike then, would you choose an aero road bike, a climbing road bike, or a do-it-all, one bike to do it all road bike?
I kind of miss true aero road bikes. Like I think the Cervelo is it the S5 with the cool like stem bar thing?
Yeah.
Like I love that bike. I think that thing looks super cool. I ride an NV Melee right now.
Okay, interesting.
Which is a bit of a hybrid, I guess. It's kind of, in that generation. Prior to that, I had a Tarmac SL7, and then prior to that, I had a Venge, the last generation of the Venge. I loved that bike. Didn't handle well sometimes in turns. It got a bit skittish. Like in crits, if you were pushing it hard and you had expansion cracks or changes or dips, it would want to chatter through that. Whereas the SL7 was a bit more calm. The Melee is by far and away, it's not as exciting as the SL7 or the SL8, but it is the best handling bike I've ever ridden. And I know I'm not sponsored by Envy. I'm not sponsored by anybody. I just really like their stuff. So, but that's, the Melee's awesome. But if I'm frank, I kind of miss aero bikes.
Yeah.
That
I was
would be
going to
the
say,
one I would
doesn't
pick.
annoy you that it is a bit slower than those other two bikes? Or you just don't really think about it?
You know what's interesting? This could totally be placebo. I do not pretend to be a wind tunnel at all. but like
Oh, I
I
do.
feel like I feel like the Melee is faster from like 19 to 23 miles an hour. I don't know whether that would be in kilometers right
Yeah,
now, but
30-ish. Yeah.
yep. And I
Yeah.
feel like it's faster there. And I feel like the Venge only got faster when I got up to like above 25, 27 miles an hour. And again, it could totally be placebo. The cool part about that Venge is in a crit or a road race and you were really ripping, it did like when I got into the wind, like it did feel like I had a relative advantage, and it probably was all placebo. Who cares? Placebo, if it has that effect, I guess. But it's I feel like for most riding, it's actually faster. Now because of that weird sweet spot, and they did say that they designed it around that, and I kind of doubted that marketing at first, and I was like, that sounds like cop out marketing to me, where it's like it's actually not fastest, but we just designed it around a sweet spot. But I do actually think there might be something to it.
I think that
but it's
comes
not-
down to the yaw angles, doesn't it? Like what yaw angle are you generally optimizing for? And generally the less the bikes that have the tubes that aren't as deep relatively perform better as it's
As
plus
the wind
10.
moves more to the side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then generally they're not going to even come close when it's 0.5 degrees. And that's the payoff.
That's such an interesting point with yaw angle, because if you look, most brands are going to market their aero bike, and you have to look at the fine print to see like what yaw angle, even if they do say that, it's actually best at.
Yeah.
Because I could be wrong, but it's an insanely high percentage of your time is spent with, I think, within like a 0.3 degree yaw angle window on either side of just dead on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but if your bike is faster at like 4.7 degrees, like negative 4.7 degrees, you're going to run with that if you're going to market it, right?
Yeah,
Is like what these
100%.
brands do.
Yeah.
That's what Trek did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tested it at a slow speed and then averaged it the way off, so wind's fucking coming backwards on you. It's like, it's quick.
Yeah, the important thing is just how it goes through dead on headwind, because that's what we encounter most.
So have you got 30, so you got the 4.5s on, so you're running 30 mil Conti, or 30 mil tires on it?
Yeah, so I was running the 29s from
the Envy ones?
for a while.
Okay.
Yeah, I like the S-Works turbos in terms of like grip and speed. They do wear down crazy fast. I've never been a big Conti fan. I just whether it's from flats or I don't feel a lot of confidence out of the tire in a turn. But they're fast. The course of speeds I've ran to. There's like in our office here, there's a bike shop room. Like there's a whole spot that should be an office for a human, then instead it's just an entire bike shop. And there's probably, I'm not over exaggerating, there's probably somewhere around 90 pairs of tires that we have there.
Yeah,
They're
wow.
like, and there's like a bunch of different waxing pots, and it's all the nerd stuff.
Yeah.
And within there, I feel like a lot of different tires. And I think that I like the turbo, the feel the best out of it, wears down super fast. Those MVs seem to be kind of a decent compromise, a normal one. I haven't tried their race tire. But right now, actually, on my Melee, I have 35s. I have the Specialized Mondos.
Okay.
And I put those on just because I wanted to try a 35 on there, because it can clear 35s. And I'm honestly shocked at how much I love it.
Interesting.
I don't think I would ever go below like 30 or 29, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd ever go below 30 again.
Yeah.
But 35 kind of has me wondering. And
Yeah.
I've done, people probably know who this is with, but we've done a lot of tire testing at the very pointy end of the gravel and mountain bike field, like a lot of testing. And in doing all that testing, practically speaking, wider is faster in most cases. That tends to be a principle that is true, but it can be overruled by certain things like casing tech and other stuff. But
yeah,
it's if I'm picking a gravel tire, I'm going to go for probably, and I know this is probably sacrilege to some people, but I'm going to go with the Aspen ST with the 2.25 from Maxxis and the 170 TPI.
Okay. So they're mountain bike tires, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Or I'll run an Aspen that I've burned down.
Interesting.
So like, run the tire completely down. So it's basically bald in the center. And then that thing is pretty darn fast. It will not break well, but it's going to roll really fast.
So much of that's course depend. Like there were a couple of US guys who came out and did one of the gravel events here last month, and they were saying that the racing here is quite different. Like it's not as technical. It's not as mountain bikey. It's not as you can maybe the balance shifts back towards the slight. When I say narrower, most of them still running like 45s, but yeah, we haven't kind of gone quite as far as that in terms of the extreme thing. Which brings me to another question: Leadville or Unbound? What's bigger? What's better?
Well, I haven't been to Unbound.
Okay.
I would like to. I say this cautiously. I would like to do it because I feel like it's a bucket list item you got to do. Having said that, and having flown over Kansas countless times, driven through it, I think once, but flown over it, I do not want to 200 miles through those hills. Doesn't sound like the best day. I've done Leadville.
Yeah.
It's a really, really crappy day. Like it's really hard, man. Like, and it's a contrived course. It isn't going to be fun. But it is an immense achievement to get that done. Anybody who finishes that day at Leadville should like pat themselves on the back. Like it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And it's the closest thing to Ironman feeling like that I've felt at a bike race. Like if anybody's been to an Ironman, you stay there through the last finishers. It's like a spiritual experience, like seeing what these people are sacrificing and getting through to get across that line. It's amazing. And Leadville has that vibe. So it's pretty special. And I only assume that Unbound has to have that vibe too. But man, it's just not exciting to me. Like gravel in general, I usually view it as just like it's just like road racing, but on really bad roads. Like, why would I want to do that?
Yeah.
I would rather just race on road or I'd rather race mountain bikes. That's kind of how I feel about it. But the camaraderie and everything else and how big the events are, that part's really cool. So if I had to pick Unbound because I haven't done it, I guess, but I don't anticipate having any fun whatsoever there.
Well, the other thing I was going to say is like the sad part of us doing this chat today is we were hoping to do this potentially in person with you coming out to do Peaks in March, but unfortunately that's not going to be happening. So just quickly, like, how are you? Like you've had surgery?
Yeah, I was planning on doing Peaks and I was super stoked, and then we live up at like somewhere around like 2,700 meters where we're at, and it's cold, snowy, and skiing's great, but riding isn't. And there's a lot of ice and stuff. So I was like, I'm going to drive down to Sacramento, California area and dodge the ice. And sure enough, on a 55-degree sunny day down in California, there was somehow ice in a super tight switchback, downhill switchback. And I never saw it. It didn't look wet. It didn't even look shiny. And I just instantly, like, just from wheels to head and shoulder. So broke my collarbone, and it was a bad break. It broke into 10 pieces. So it was just a full shatter, but we got it all plated together, and the shoulder damage is pretty severe and the nerve damage is pretty tough, but didn't need surgery on the shoulder part. So super grateful. So we're doing well, but no Peaks. And that sucks.
Yeah, that sucks. It was disappointing. So, did you have a goal for it? Had you got to that point?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like,
okay.
As like nerdy as I possibly can with any like event, like ran through best bike split like multiple times, different scenarios, did the whole thing and tried to figure it all out. I thought that if I could do 8 hours, that would be a really good day. And for context, like, the peak watt kg I've had is 5.2. But right now, like for me, like a really good watt kg is like around 4.5, 4.6, with my age and life and everything else. I probably would have been coming into there somewhere around 4.5. And I think that I would have had to be pretty efficient. I watched your video, Chris, amongst other videos, and studied the course and did all that stuff. And I realized like that race is an absolute beast. And especially like once you get to, what was it, Mount Hotham, the first climb, like looks like a descent that totally does not actually look like a descent when you look at the elevation profile.
No,
It looks like it's going to feel
bumpy.
terrible. And then it's hot and it's windy, or other people told me it's like super cold and snowy sometimes. So I thought 8 hours might be possible, and I had a stretch goal of like 7:45.
Yeah, I thought that would have been achievable.
Just based on the what's peculiar, like sub 8.5 would be like a good goal.
Very achievable, and it is because it is in that weird space, Jonathan, that it's like it's a race, but it's not a race. I mean, you've probably heard all this sort of stuff in the past, but it's like it's ridden it's ridden as a fondo in the sense like you're not going to get to the bottom of Toowoomba and guys aren't like sending it with, you know, attacks and counterattacks. It's even at the very front, it's very much like, okay, well, this is the pace we're going to ride. You're here, you're not. Then the next group sort of forms and it just kind of makes its way out into that. So it's probably as you can actually calculate it quite well in terms of your effort. And I reckon, yeah, you would have got around it.
Such a savage race though. Like that short climb in the beginning really throws a wrench in anybody's plans if they wanted to pace evenly, because if you try to just stick to your pacing plan, you're going to be stuck alone or with slower people. Then it's really like a clever course in that regard. And then it seems like the ultimate like test of just like your mettle, and it's just an attrition day. Like
it's very much
so big.
Yeah. And I heard you guys talking about that descent at the beginning. It is sketchy as hell, just to confirm, because you are basically almost riding in the dark as well. Because it's, you know, it's late, or it's March, so you're starting to not get that earlier sunrise. Yeah, so you can be descending. Maybe you could have played potentially the celebrity card and got yourself up towards the front of the front pin, because that would be hella helpful, I reckon.
I was hoping for that, by the way. When I saw that descent, I was like, hopefully I can somehow find my way to the front, man, because that looks terrifying.
Yeah.
What are you planning to do this year for it, Chris?
So I got around it in 7:30 last year. It's weird. I was thinking about this before, but being the kind of racing background, I find it very hard to sit down and talk about an event and put a time on it. I'm still very much in the mindset of like just the placing, because that's just how I think. And there are a lot of variables. You're right. There are some years there that it is snowing and it's horrific. That said, I've never actually trained for peaks before. Like I have actually done it this year. This is the first year I actually trained for it. So I would like to go faster, but what will probably happen is I think I will go faster, maybe sub 7:30, but I do think more, the flip side of that will be that I actually think a lot faster guys will come this year. And so I may actually get a worse, quote unquote, place as a result of that. But it's almost a benefit to have some faster guys there as well, because if you can make that group, that can kind of bring you sort of further along in the course at a faster rate. So yeah, sub 7:30 would be around where I'm at, I would have thought.
By the numbers, it's got to be one of the hardest one-day road races. And I know, like you said, so you know, not everybody approaches it like a race, but still, by the numbers, it has to be one of the hardest one-day road races.
All right, I reckon that might be us done, Jonathan. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Happy to have done it with you guys. It's cool to be on the NERO show. It's like, I think you guys are responsible, by the way, for like voting like peaks. I heard on our forum, somebody was like, it's something about your guys' show. Yeah. Because I was like, how in the Australia is just rising up the charts, and they voted on it. So it's cool to come on here.
Sorry, there was a gigantic conflict of interest kind of thing, because Peaks Challenge advertised on the show, and then we told everyone to go and vote for you to do it. So it's all a bit dodgy.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, it's been really cool. You guys have like a super passionate group of people that listen to your show, and a bunch of fun people. So it's an honor to come on here.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Likewise.